Hello, everyone. This is María Montero Sierra, Head of Program of TVA 21 Academy and curator of this episode of Stage, revolving around Beatriz Santiago Muñoz's short film, Pájaro, cómeme, Bird, Eat Me, commissioned by TVA 21 Academy for Stage. Beatriz Santiago Muñoz is an artist and filmmaker from Puerto Rico with an extensive practice working with film, video, and installation, connecting to places and people of Puerto Rico through an active approach that she calls sensorial unconsciousness that merge documentary and fiction. Most recently, Beatriz focused on the unconscious revolving around the ecological stresses and the connection with the decolonization movement. I am very pleased that the stage has provided a fabulous context to formalize a new collaboration with Beatriz Santiago Muñoz around a new work, delving into the ocean and the decolonization of the Caribbean. In a way, it's a continuation for a first interaction between the Academy and Beatriz, who joined the second expedition of the current led by Chus Martinez to the Solomon Islands in 2019. For this occasion, I have proposed Beatriz to consider what the moments of encounters with the ocean are and how we perceive the relationship with the waters in building moments of care, something that she was already thinking about. So, Beatriz, I want to start this conversation by asking you about your film for Stage, which is now on view. Your film insinuates, suggests, opens up multiple connections through the collection of striking images, and yet avoiding a direct and uniqueness statement, which I think is a central part of your artistic practice, avoiding telling directly a narrative and really in favor of complex the stories. So with all that in mind, what can you tell us about the work that you did for Stage, Pájaro, cómeme? I am curious also of the title, Bird, Eat Me. Who is eating whom?
I'll start with the title because maybe it was something intuitive that I didn't think about a lot, but then I know that the thing that I'm interested in is the shape of the title. It has somebody that, or a being that you're addressing yourself to, the bird, and demand. So it's very, rather than a title that is sort of like stands by itself without a direction, it's very directed and it asks to be enveloped completely. And the film is a work that I made trying to think about the what it feels like, what the sensorial aspects that we might not have a name for the experience of living in the littoral, in the space that is constantly changing and that is neither ocean nor land, and that has effects on the body and on our unconscious, on our experience, the way we live, what we pay attention to, and not knowing exactly where the film was going to take me. I just went to places where by the coast, where what the coast is and what the littoral is very actively changing right now, either due to the recent swarm of earthquakes over the past 2 years in the south of the island, or because of the hurricane that would happen only every 100 years, statistically actually begins to happen more often. And that has an effect on flooding and then also on the way attention needs to be shifted, the temporal scale of that attention. So those are the things that I was thinking about and trying to look for, but without any I would say when you're doing research, you actually have a kind of hypothesis and you go about with a method, but I'm not really doing research in that way because I don't have a hypothesis and I don't have a specific method. I just put myself in a place and make myself pay attention. So maybe the film is the result of that process of paying attention to the literal and what happens there.
So actually, yes, indeed, in Pájaro, cómeme, we transit between the land and the island coastline. And there is an extremely suggestive image of the borough that is like a tunnel that connects the aquatic and floating wall with the surfers on the open air. And there is also the story that is brought up by the old man in the hammock, that it is reminded us that there is salt erupting on the surface of these holes. So the ocean has directly and indirectly been present in some other of your films. I am thinking in Black Beach Horses Come Dead Forces from 2016, and more recently in The Raven, The Trench, and the Mare from 2021, when you went into the deepness of the ocean and the unknowns, like the places of unknowns and the impossibility of translating. And I was wondering if Pájaro, cómeme is part of a larger research on the ocean, on the Caribbean Sea, even though you just said that there is no one hypothesis, but maybe there is a constellation of questions or that has been this overreaching material that you are approaching here. And I am also wondering if you will have a moment in time where you think you started to connect with the aquatic and the meaning of the ocean in this decolonization process that expand from your ever-present land. The land is always present in your films before. So,
I mean, you said a lot of interesting things there, and that maybe I will lose along the way. But I think, I mean, to go back to the idea of research versus what I think I do, I think it's just a matter of I'm a bit more chaotic than what, or, you know, I think the process of art making maybe is a bit more chaotic and always ready to go in a different direction when it appears. But I think that, I mean, the things that I am interested in very generally have to do with the experience that is unnamed. And I think that there is so much about the experience of the sea and the ocean that the names that we have for it do not fully comprehend. And so maybe a different kind of approach that is not, that has to be necessarily based on images and sounds, and has to be a bit more uncontained as the ocean, I guess. So I think that, of course, the image of the ocean, the image of the sea is a very important kind of flattened representation that for people in the Caribbean is constantly, like we feed ourselves it constantly. Either it is an image of pleasure or tourism or of being contained. And so if we want to be able to access everything that we can think or feel about the ocean or about the sea, about the experience of living by the sea, we have to sort of undo those representations. I think it's maybe I would say, rather than undoing, which implies a kind of critical stance to the representations that exist, I think what artists can do is multiply the possible representations and make them more porous and yes, less flat. which maybe has something to do with what you were referring to in the beginning about having the films not be closed, not present a way of thinking, but to make new connections. So I was really interested in Luis, the man who appears in the film, because though he lives by the very edge of the coast, because he is very poor, and this is the land that is available to him in order to live in, he also has a kind of enjoyment in living by the water, and in paying attention to everything that happens, all the different cycles that happen, that I was interested in. He has a kind of highly attuned perception, and we started the conversation talking about his dreams and the ways in which the ocean gets into his dreams. So this is something that I am interested in, how even though we might live on land, the idea of the oceanic seeps into the unconscious. And so maybe, but right now I'm like going in a lot of different directions, and I'm not sure if it's exactly what you were asking about, but in terms of what the overall scope of what I'm interested in how the oceanic is present within our unconscious and how it manifests in the ways that we live and think. And so that's not something that I can decide beforehand, but something that I have to go out and search for in conversations and observations, and sometimes even in my own unconscious.
So it's an ongoing project. And actually, Luis become maybe that mediator on this process of encounter with the ocean by being so close. And you say he is attuned to the change of the ocean because of the precarious conditions in which maybe he is forced to live. It ended up to be the first hand of knowledge about those transformations, which is, I think, something to strongly consider. What does it mean? Or how we can take care of those positions, as your film is doing by bringing him. So I wanted to ask you about something a bit more broader of your artistic practice and your position as an artist. So how do you see your artistic practice, as I believe is part of a decolonial and feminist movement, but that is also embracing ecology? And I think you have included this as part of your artistic statement.
I think that, I don't want to make any claims for the work, actually, that are beyond what it can do. I think that maybe the word decolonial has now taken on a meaning that is disconnected from anti-colonial movements, like historical anti-colonial movements or present-day anti-colonial movements, which is something that I've been interested in other work. But aside from that, I think it is useful to think about the relationship between decolonization or processes of decolonization and the importance of transforming the forms with which we think, what is possible to imagine. That, I think, is the importance of paying attention to the senses and the unconscious, because this is actually where the transformation needs to happen first, I think, rather than through institutions or through governmental processes. There's a kind of a way of changing what we can see, what we can perceive, that needs to transform first. And that is not something that can be done systematically. It's something that needs to be done through experimentation. So I'm interested in the relationship between sensorial and formal experimentation, and how necessary that process is for any kind of decolonization or anti-colonial movement. So I guess I just want to make the connection between that, because I'm not an activist, and I'm not, though I know many people who are, and I'm very interested in thinking next to them. I'm definitely in the part of the work that is thinking about the materials and senses and its representation. I mean, to make the connection also between that and feminist practice, I think that's also, I mean, it is the reason why I am interested in feminism, is because of the parts of feminism that are also grounded in a wholesale transformation of language, of the parts of feminism that understand that forms also need to change and not just representations. So for me, I think it's a tough making the connection with the language, because I think when we talk about decolonial practices or feminist practices or ecology, they're also each situated within particular historical moments. They're ways of understanding, and so there are some I feel much more connected than others. Like, I mean, the reason why I was mentioning, the trouble with the word decolonial right now is because of its sort of institutional explosion, which becomes disconnected from actual anti-colonial movements. You could say the same thing about feminism. Perhaps the same thing could be said about ecology, if institutions that really have nothing to do with environmental practices or thinking are invoking ecology, then one starts to wonder what it actually refers to. But I would say that the way that I think about it is, rather than thinking about ecology, I think about thinking with the place. And so to go back to the ocean, the ocean is it's both a place and a non-place, it's very, you can think about it in both ways. And so I'm interested in that strangeness as well, and how to transfer that strangeness to other ways to other things as well. Like, what if we thought about that land as well as a place and a non-place?
So still maybe going a bit deeper in your active engagement on social, political, and ecological demands. Some locations you have included in your films, like the island of Vieques, not here, but in other films. And it's actually a place that we discuss about it, and that it appears on the podcast that is accompanying on a stage this film. Because we invited, upon your suggestion, some what I would call key members of this group of decolonization, coming from archaeologists, Reniel Rodriguez, or from poetry, Nicole Delgado, who was also involved in the activist movement in Vieques. And it goes back maybe to the place where Luis, the old man in the hammock, is living. So what are the signifiers of this location on these specific islands in the reconstructions of the stories of Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I mean, Vieques has become a really important place and history, in part because what happened, the fact that it was a Navy base for 60 years, that it felt that it received the brunt of a military presence, its bombing practices for 60 years, not just the island, but the ocean surrounding it, the Vieques Sound, which divides Puerto Rico, the main island, from Vieques, but also that it became the focus of a movement. I mean, the funny thing is, it was actually led by people in Vieques, but 20 years ago, and even the 40 years before that, because it's actually a movement that lasted many decades and came to a head in the early 2000s. That it was actually that many people participated in it. That it wasn't a small group of activists. It was led by a group of people that were in the island, but that it was a really massive movement. And so it became a place through which you could very clearly see the different pressures, responses, possibilities, and the ways in which certain ways of thinking about the place become sort of overdetermine its history, ideas of development or of nature, without people as part of that nature. Or, it's really interesting that once actually the movement was successful in getting the bombing to stop and then the military out, the language around it, not by the activists that were involved, of course, but by others, changed from an island that had been bombed and that is heavily contaminated to a nature preserve, untouched. And this is that language allowed it to be now transformed into a place where there's a lot of speculation, land speculation, and where people are being displaced. So what I'm explaining is all of these processes happened in a very small piece of land very quickly and really, in an accelerated way. So in some ways, all of these political and environmental issues became crystallized for everybody else. And so, in a way, even when we're not thinking about Vieques, we're thinking about Vieques. It's almost like it is 20. It can show us the future, which is something to fear. And in that way, it clarifies what is happening in the rest of the island and right now. That's sort of, I think that's a really important thing. And then also for a lot of us, and I think maybe for Nicole, this is the same, that when we were younger, we participated as just one more person in the movement, which was based on like going and sitting in the bombing range so that you were a human being in a place and the bombing could not continue. And many of us were part of that. But then there is once the military leaves, and that very clear action of putting your body in the place where it matters becomes, there's now what, and so many of us 10 years later or 20 years later are still thinking about what the place and the experience means and how to think about it, how to continue with it, how to continue with the problems when actually, or thinking about it when there's no clear path. And that means sometimes, changing the way that we're thinking about it from political language, political problems, political thinking to other kinds of language and thinking.
Which it goes back to what you were saying before, thinking from the places, that it was, you will describe it more. And I think this is a bit what I was hinting on, your position in Puerto Rico, not only in Puerto Rico, but where the places have a very particular signifier.
And I think maybe Nicole doesn't mention this, but because they start talking about, I was listening to the recording and they start talking about camping very quickly without actually making the connection between, I think they don't mention this, that camping, that action was the political response in that moment in Vieques. It was by, so it's something that is full of pleasure and leisure, and that is actually what needed to happen, which was, let's go sit on the beach and do nothing, and just by doing nothing you are stopping this other thing from happening, which I don't think it's an accident that Nicole has understands camping as a kind of political sensorial experience. I think it's connected to that place and that moment.
Yeah, if we return to the film, pose in the sound channels, which are vital contributors to the transit between the aquatic world, the land, and the open air. And in the open air, in your film, we see these three moments. We actually see this moment of leisure as well, as you were mentioning, in this case, people just by the sea. And I wanted to ask you if you can tell about many sounds included in the film, which combine real and imaginative sounds, and also how the sound channels empower the space of dreams that is central to your narrative in your films, and that you were mentioning is this idea of the unconscious, of how the sea in our unconscious could materialize in other imagination. So how the sound play an important role maybe in building this unconscious in your practice.
The sound is like a combination of the field recordings of bird sounds, of recordings of the of underwater movement of land, and then also like there's a moment where you see a horse up close eating mangoes very skillfully, and I guess I wanted the as if you were with her, with that horse. You are looking at all of this from this point of view, that I wanted that closeness, and I guess that confusion, and the title refers to eating, eat me, and that's I wanted that sort of really intense pleasure, at least that I get from the horse eating all these delicious fruit, to be mixed together with these images of people doing all sorts of things by the coast, which are actually not what you usually see, there's not what you usually see in representations of the beach. There's people that are driving their cars right up to the edge and having a conversation there while they look out to the sea. There's slight variations, of the ways in which being with the ocean makes something possible. Those two men sitting in the car speaking, it's possible for them to be there together because they are sitting in a car looking at the ocean. It's an important part of what makes that conversation possible. And it's the same thing for the couple that are sitting in the rocks by the trees. And so I wanted to try to access this possibility that literal structures somehow. Yeah.
I haven't thought about it, but now that you are talking, it made me think that it almost like you turn the gaze of the human to the gaze of the horse, and also the sounds are much more present coming from the natural world in quotation than from the human disturbance of the space. So I have mentioned before the distinctive selection of image of the also the tones and colors of the material of your film, which in this case is analog, but you also use digital cameras. So in this occasion for Bird Eat Me, we see still like images in black and white and color image, and it's very clear the materiality of the film. I think it's a 16 millimeters camera, but you can correct me. So I wonder, what does this materiality allow you to tell? And also, I am very curious, why did you choose an analog format in this particular commission that you knew it was going to live in the digital, in a digital platform? It feels almost like defeating the tide of the digital image by bringing the pale colors and the grain of the analog film to our screen computer, which I am very, very grateful that you did.
I mean, I think that this is something that is it's not a very interesting response, but when you're working with 3-minute rolls of film, and you have an idea of the information that you're going to lose, color information, and you just think differently. Maybe you're paying attention to certain kinds of shapes or certain kind of light. It just attunes your brain is thinking differently, because the machine that you have in your hand is different, that it allows a different kind of time. And that, I mean, I think also sometimes it changes social expectations as well. If you arrive with a video camera that can record for a half-hour conversation, there might be a way that somebody sits with you and speaks to you. If you arrive for a moment which you just have 3 minutes and you're going to choose one action with the other person, then it sort of, encapsulates things. It just forces you to go there very quickly. I mean, that's kind of what happened, for example, with Luis. I just have a minute and a half left on this roll. I'm going to shoot this and this, but I know that you were thinking about lying down in the hammock and how you sleep at night when you want to sleep outside. So we just went there in I guess a different way, a different sense of time. Yeah, so it's a combination of the way that it forces you to think in a materially or visually in a different way, and then also what the machine's limitations do to what happens socially as you're filming.
We just had received a gift because of the way that you wanted to compose, but there was no limitation of thinking that the film was going to be presented, at least in this instance, for the digital wall.
I wasn't thinking about it. I didn't resist, I didn't think like, oh, this doesn't make sense, it's going to be digital. In part because actually most of the things that I shoot 16, I end up editing digitally anyway. And then maybe if they go back to being projected 16, then they go back to the lab. But like the digital is part of the process as well. So I wasn't thinking about that. It wasn't an active resistance.
But we really embraced it. I think like we were very happy to see that grain. While you were talking, it made me think of, because you were thinking your brain and your body is tuned to what the machine can provide you. And it felt almost that this was also part of the sensorial that you were mentioning, that you wanted your brain, you wanted that the film brings back in this connection to the site, to the land, and here in this connection with the water, and imagine it, what can it mean, or what it means differently, that it has been exposed and kind of imposed on us when we are looking into beaches in general, particularly when they are very touristic beaches, and in the Caribbean they get an extra level of different forms of colonization, as massive tourism could be thought through.
Yeah, I think that we all kind of intuitively understand what happens when you frame something, like you are seeing something, but then when you frame it, when you just think about sort of cutting certain things out, or whether it's noise, visual material, or just formally, that there's that it creates a different kind of attention. And yeah, that I think that is something that is just really clear when you're looking through a camera, that it helps you transform your perception. Yeah.
So thank you very much, Beatriz.
Thank you. Thank you.